watching closely.
What's the secret, Max?
You just gotta find something you love to do and then do it for the rest of your life.
I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me.
Hello and welcome to The Establishing Shot, a podcast where we do deep dives into directors and their filmographies. We are here on episode 34 of the podcast, and I'm Eli Price. I'm your host, and I'm here with our guest today, Dave Lester, joining us all the way from the Seattle area?
Greater Seattle area up here in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. I got it right.
You win.
Yeah. But yeah, we're here jumping into our first episode, like covering film material for Spielberg. Had a couple weeks ago, we're recording this the day actually that my first Spielberg overview episode came out. But yeah, when this releases, it'll be a couple weeks ago now. And we're jumping in, getting going in the films. And so I'm excited to jump into Duel is going to be the main subject of our talk today. And then we'll touch briefly on his other two TV movies, Something Evil and Savage. But yeah, it's good to have you, Dave. How are you doing? And kind of update everyone. You joined me for Insomnia, is that right?
That is correct. Yeah, Christopher Nolan's Insomnia. I still make the case that it's one of his most underrated thrillers. So that was a lot of fun. I'm so excited to be back. I think I mentioned it last episode, but I love what you do with this podcast. I love the idea of picking a director and starting at the beginning and going through their work and seeing how their art and their work progresses over time. And sometimes you see similar themes and similar aspects of how they see the world coming out. And I think it's such a cool way to experience this type of artwork, cinema. And yeah, I've done it just personally with like the Coen brothers, with Spielberg, who we're talking about today, and with Catherine Bigelow. I think my wife and I might move on to Spike Lee pretty soon. So, great podcast. I enjoy it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And you've gotten a new podcast going yourself since we last talked. I believe you mentioned it, I think, on the Insomnia one. But yeah, I've been listening to it.
Thank you.
It's really good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Tell everyone a little bit about that.
My second podcast is called "Does the Bible Say That?" And basically, what I do is I just, I'm going through Genesis right now. I pretty much go verse by verse, passage by passage, and it's not a sermon, it's not preaching, it's just talking about what the Bible says, and then also discussing what it means. And sometimes there's discussion, dialogue, debate about that second point, but I kind of think of it in two different ways for two different people who may tune in and listen to the podcast. One, for the Christian, because I think we're dealing with a time in our country right now where people are, they use the word deconstruction, and deconstruction isn't always a complete destruction of faith. Sometimes deconstruction means I am holding something out at arm's length and kind of re-examining it and looking at it again. And so I figured for the Christian, it's good let's just sola scriptura. Let's just look at the Bible. What does the Bible say? What does the Bible mean? And then secondarily, and this is the reason I don't really preach or do a sermon that often. I put sermons that I preach on there every once in a while as special episodes. But the main part of the podcast is for someone who is an atheist and agnostic, for a friend who is maybe not a Christian anymore. I want the podcast not to be threatening in any way. If someone wants to actually dive in and say, okay, well, I've never really read the Bible. What does the Bible say? What is what's the Bible all about? So it's kind of that starting point if somebody's curious about finding out what one of the most important books, even if one's a stone cold atheist, like the impact of the Bible across the world has been just incredible, through
Yeah.
thousands of years. So that's my aim with the podcast.
Yeah, I've been really enjoying it. I definitely recommend checking that out. I think it's on pretty much all the platforms.
Yeah, Spotify,
Yeah,
Apple, a few other ones. Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Definitely highly recommend that. But yeah, yeah, we're gonna go ahead and jump into talking Spielberg. And I
Yeah.
always like to ask my guests what was their like introduction to Spielberg. And I know you're excited to talk about this.
Oh
So
yeah.
yeah, give us your Spielberg experience background.
Okay. Well, so to totally date myself to your listeners and viewers, I am 44 years old. I was born in 1980. So I do not remember a time in my life where I did not know who Steven Spielberg was.
Mm,
And usually as a kid, I knew who actors were: Harrison Ford, Mark Hamill. I knew who performers were. I rarely was interested in filmmakers because I was like, oh, what's a director? What's a producer? Right. But Steven
hmm
Spielberg and George Lucas were two guys that I absolutely knew growing up. And they were the storytellers of my childhood. And, realistically, even now being 44, they're two major storytellers in my life. And I guess I'm kind of what do they call us, geriatric millennial or something like that at our age. Maybe I'm at the tail end of Gen X or the elder millennial. So however you want to clarify me, but people who were born around the
Yeah.
time that I was born, I think people who were into film kind of had similar experiences with these two filmmakers, and so much
hmm
love for them because of the stories that they told. So Steven Spielberg is like a third grandfather to me. Um,
That's
a
great.
storyteller in my childhood. My first experience with Spielberg directing, I believe, was probably E.T., and it came out when I was 2 years old. So that means I probably saw it on a VHS video cassette tape at some
Hmm.
point. And it was probably before age 5. I actually texted my mom, shout out to Sue, to check with her on these facts. But when I was 5 years old at Halloween, my mom homemade me an ET costume that I walked around our neighborhood in. So that was
Very cool.
probably the first movie that I saw of Steven Spielberg, but obviously in the 80s, I grew up watching, and my parents probably let me see a few movies a little too early in my life, such as Jaws or Raiders of the Lost Ark. But I absolutely
Sure.
watched those movies like crazy. I love them. Raiders of the Lost Ark is still one of my all-time favorite movies, probably one of the best action adventure movies ever made. I watched
Mhm.
Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Um, I just, Harrison Ford playing Han Solo, Indiana Jones in that trilogy of Indiana Jones movies in the 80s was, as a boy, it was what I thought a man was, growing up, like for
Sure.
better or worse. And with all there's certainly
hmm
cultural critique to do about that. But that's what I looked up to. And, obviously the Indiana Jones trilogy was Steven Spielberg. And I remember distinctly
Yep.
seeing Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade in the theaters when I was 9 and just being blown away. So
Mm.
Spielberg is like this third grandfather. He is proverbial, sitting around the campfire with me. He's telling me stories that are creepy and scary. He's telling me other stories that are filled with awe and wonder and this like
hmm
childlike imagination of what it was to be alive. And so he captured a lot of
Mm.
our dreams as millennials and even beyond our generation. And he stated that he was dreaming himself, which is what you talked about kind of in your first episode, that he was dreaming himself when he made movies, and he would go on to form
hmm
DreamWorks with his friends and fellow collaborators. And so as I got older and we millennials got older, it was like Spielberg sat us down and said, okay, I need to tell you some terrible things about the world. And he made Schindler's List when I was, 13. So I grew up with Spielberg stories, and the majority of them were always welcomed, and they were always there and always around me.
Mm. Yeah, that's really cool. It's really cool to have, someone that really grew up with Spielberg to
Yeah,
give that perspective, because I kind of shared a little bit on that episode of like my memories are like kind of vague. Like I know I watched the indie movies and ET as a kid, but I don't have like strong memories of them. I really like, and I still have a lot of Spielberg blind spots that I'm going to be correcting through this series. So yeah,
which
I'm
ones have you
excited
seen?
to. Yeah, so I have not seen. I'm trying to think through his filmography. I have not seen 1941. Um, I haven't seen The Color Purple, Empire of the Sun, always, and then the kind of anthology ones like I haven't seen Sugarland Express yet. As of the time of this recording, I'll be catching up with that real soon.
Yeah.
And then I haven't seen his like anthology um, ones either, like the Twilight Zone movie or
Okay.
the Amazing Stories that was released as a movie. Those are the ones I haven't seen in this kind of early 2 decades of his career. Uh, but yeah, it's, and then I kind of have a similar through each of the phases of his career, probably like 4 to 5 blind spots, because he has so many.
Oh yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so I probably have like 4 to 5 blind spots in each phase. Maybe not the most recent one. I think I've seen maybe all but like one or two
Mhm.
since like since the 2000s.
Okay.
But
Well,
or
not
since
to
the
put
2010s. But
since
yeah,
the 2010s, not to put your
yeah,
expectations way out of the park here, but I do have friends that say that Empire of the Sun is their favorite Spielberg movie, and that's
yeah.
probably,
I'm excited.
yeah, that one and Munich, I would say, are his two very underrated. Like, if you could call a Spielberg movie underrated, it's probably those two, or
Hmm,
one of those two is like
cool.
being the most. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'm excited about Empire of the Sun. I found like an abridged audiobook on Spotify that I'm planning on listening to before that. I wasn't sure if I would have time to take in the whole book,
Yeah.
but there's like an abridged one that's available that for not for free, but with Spotify Premium, which I have already. So
Nice.
it's funny how like it feels like something's for free when you're actually paying for it. I think that's how they trick us these days. But
These tech companies, I tell you, yeah, it's brilliant business
uh,
tactics, right?
they're like, we're adding audiobooks now to Spotify. And it's like, oh, I'm getting something for free with what I'm already paying for. And it's like, no, you're still paying for it. um, but yeah, so I'm really excited to dig into these. But yeah, today we're starting at the, not, I guess not quite the very beginning of his directing career, because he got his start in TV. I talked about a few of those episodes very briefly in the in the overview episode. I was telling Dave before the we started recording that Columbo episode is probably his best like TV episode.
Yeah,
He directed.
I've never seen it. And another friend of mine,
Yeah,
Dan Serdahl, shout out to Dan if he listens to this. He has seen it. He's a big Columbo fan, and I think he says that's one of the best Columbo episodes. Period. Like, that
mm,
is really really good.
yeah, yeah. I remember reading that Steven Spielberg saying like out of all of his TV era, that was like the one script that he got that he actually like was really impressed by and like wanted to like do his best work for because the script was good. So that was cool to kind of see and hear. But yeah, the other ones are they all have like interesting Spielberg distinctives to them,
Mhm.
where he's kind of like, you can see he's kind of filling out some of the stuff that he would like continue to grow in his use of as far as like camera work and stuff. Um, but he didn't have too much control over what sorts of stories he was telling in that phase.
Right.
But that would kind of change with Duel, because so we'll jump back a little bit before Spielberg gets involved. You have Richard Matheson, who was an author. He wrote a lot of short stories. I want to say he wrote some novels, but I'm honestly not sure. I didn't do that much digging into Matheson. But he also wrote some scripts for The Twilight Zone, which was cool. And Steven Spielberg was familiar with him because of that. And I think some like adaptations of some Edgar Allan Poe stuff he wrote scripts for. But yeah, so he was kind of like an author, but also like familiar with like screenwriting and stuff like that. But yeah, he authored this short story. I think it was the same name, but I'm not positive now that I think about it. I don't think I wrote that down in my notes.
It was in
But
Playboy, right? In 1971, he had a
yeah,
short story, and it was
it
kind of
was.
based on an experience that he actually had, which is
It was
wild.
so, and it stood out. It stood out in his mind because it was on the day of the JFK assassination.
Oh
So
man,
they, yeah, that it was on that day. They had left somewhere, him and his friend, and they were driving, and this truck basically like kind of rammed into them and almost ran them off the road. And they like pulled off, and he went on, and he was kind of shaken up about it. And then I guess later on that day was kind of like, man, what would have happened if that truck would have just like kept terrorizing us? And he's like, I should write a story based on that. And that's like where the idea came from, which I think is really
oh my,
cool and interesting. But yeah,
yeah.
uh, yeah.
dealing
So
dealing with that aspect of road rage. I mean, I'm trying because this is 1971, and I was trying
mhm.
to think, even in getting preparing for this episode, if there were any other movies or anything that really dealt with road rage prior to this story. I mean, in the early 70s,
Yeah, yeah,
at least road rage in
um,
its modern form, I guess.
yeah. And I think I want to say either maybe on the extra features on the DVD, or maybe somewhere I was reading. I want to say someone had kind of commented that was kind of talking about the movie, that like this was like when rage was starting but to become a thing.
Yeah,
um, I guess it took what, like 50 years of vehicles for there to be for road rage to like really make its mark in
yeah,
society.
right.
Um,
I mean, I'm sure it
which I guess
happened
is
in the 1920s
right.
or something because people are people. But I guess to become
Right.
an institution, maybe we'll say
Yeah.
the Road Rage Institution, the
Yeah.
legendary tales of, you know,
To to
bad
become
behavior.
like a personality trait.
Yes, exactly. There you
That's a guy who has road rage. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, so George Eckstein, who was a producer for Universal Studios at the time, read the story and bought the rights to it. And Matheson was kind of like weary of writing a script for it, but Eckstein, whichever way you say it, I'm never good with that. Um, he kind of convinced Matheson to write the script. So he did, and they couldn't get like a star actor to get attached to it, and so they ended up just kind of like slotting it in for an ABC. Back then they had what were called ABC movie of the weekend, and so it was basically like a made for TV movies. They would have new ones, I guess, each weekend, or
go.
something like that. So Spielberg's assistant had given him the story, the short story that was in Playboy magazine, and Spielberg read it, and she had told him like, "Hey, Universal has a script for this." Um, and they're wanting to make a TV movie for it. And Spielberg was like, I love this story. I really want to make this movie. And I think he kind of saw it as like a possible transition point out of TV, because he did not want to direct for TV. He was like, he was done with it.
Yeah.
And
I remember you
so
talking
yeah,
about
so
that last episode. Yeah. It's
yeah,
it's interesting to think about Spielberg in that way. Like he is a feature filmmaker. He's
mhm.
almost probably 80 years old now, and like you said,
Yeah, I
you're
think
looking
he's
through his filmography.
yeah.
It's daunting. Like he's made so many movies. But even what I was saying at the beginning, think about comparing him to George Lucas. George Lucas had the original Star Wars trilogy, which I give him credit for. Amazing,
Mhm.
genius,
Yeah.
visionary. But he kind of just was, I don't want to say riding the coattails. I mean, I just think he realized that he completely changed the world and defined culture in a way and just kept trying to do that with what he had created. But Spielberg's like, no, I'm just going to keep making all different kinds of movies, you know? So he wanted to
Mhm.
go in the movies. I listened to your previous episode of him being kind of TV. It's boring. I want to make movies. So that totally makes
Mhm.
sense. He wanted to make the jump.
Yeah. And he definitely saw this as like his big chance, I guess. Maybe not big chance, but like an opportunity.
Mhm.
Like, okay, I'm going to make a feature film. It's going to be on TV, but it's a feature film nonetheless. And yeah, he kind of had, when he read it, he imagined like a visual narrative, um, like with very minimal character based plot and more just like a visual narrative. And he also talked about like he had these Arizona Highways magazines when he was young. He grew up a lot in Phoenix, Arizona, and there were all these like beautiful like pictures of these highways in Arizona that like disappeared into the vanishing point that he had like in his mind. And then also like it brought back memories of being bullied as a kid. He dealt a lot with bullying, um, just as like I guess a young creative, and also dealing with anti-Semitism too. um, and so yeah, I guess like it brought out, it just like excited, the thought of making this excited him.
Yeah.
So he calls up Eckstein and he's like, hey, I want to do this. And Eckstein was not not impressed with Spielberg. He kind of had this reputation as the avant-garde kid at Universal back then. And I even want to say Eckstein had seen his short film Amblin and was just like not impressed with it.
Oh, no.
And yeah, and so Eckstein says, "Okay, I tell you what, you send me what you think is your best work, and I'll watch it, and then I'll get back to you." So Spielberg actually sent him. We're just talking about it. He sent him at that time the unaired first draft of the Columbo episode, "Murder by the Book."
Okay.
So it hadn't aired at that point. It was like the first cut of the show, and so he sent it to him. And Eckstein watched it, and he was like, "Okay, I'm going to give this kid a meeting. I'm impressed with his work on this." So yeah, he got the script. Eckstein wouldn't even give him the script. He was like, I'm going to watch this first, and then maybe I'll give you the script."
He's like, the kid that made
So
Amblin. I'm not going to wait. You don't even want to waste your time reading the script, kid.
yeah,
So, okay. So
yep,
for me and for other hardcore Steven Spielberg fans listening, I think we're going to have to see this Columbo episode, because that is the reason why
yeah,
we have a Steven Spielberg, that
it
producers
is.
finally gave him a chance after watching
Mhm.
this episode. So that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and it is. I will say too, take advantage of your local library, because that's what I did. I checked out the first season of Columbo from the library, and it's season 1, episode 1. And so I just watched that episode and then returned the set because I didn't plan on watching the whole season. But yeah, the Columbo episode really did it. And it's a very good episode. For one, he got a hold of like he said, a good script. It was a good story, and he really like put a lot of effort into the way he worked the camera for it, and Eckstein liked it. And so, yes, Spielberg met with him. He shared his vision of this visual narrative, like telling the story through the editing and the camera movement and the framing and the sound, um, and how like he wanted the driver's monologues to be at a minimum, if at all. He wanted to remove all of them at first.
Young Steven Spielberg, he had the right
Yeah,
instincts, because that
he did.
we'll come to this later. That's one of my big critiques,
Yeah,
probably, of this film is I don't like the
yeah.
interior monologues. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah. We'll definitely touch on that because that's one of my critiques too. Um, yeah, he did that, and then there was a ABC kind of head honcho named Barry Diller, who had liked one of his episodes of The Psychiatrist, which are unwatchable because you can't find it anywhere.
Hmm.
I I searched everywhere to try to find. You can't rent it or buy it. It's not. There's no physical copies. I think it only ran 6 episodes, and ABC canceled it or something. Um, and so, but yeah, he in that episode, the thing people liked about it was the way he captured emotion. And so I think that's probably what Diller liked, and Diller, along with Eckstein, like gave him the job based off of that work. So in the end, he mostly stuck with the script. He kind of added he added just a little bit. He added the opening sequence where David Mann is like pulling out of his home and driving. It's kind of like the title sequence, I guess.
Yeah, it's
He
over the
added that
credit.
in, and then
Let's put a pin in
yeah,
this one too, because I have something to say about that, and I think that was a good addition. Actually, I have a
for
whole
sure.
lot about that, but we'll put a pin on that for later.
Yeah, and even just on what he did with the script, Matheson, it was in a DVD extra where they were interviewing Matheson, the author of the story. He was like, yeah, he mostly stuck with a good script and added his own brilliance, which I kind of thought was funny because it's like he's patting himself on the back for like, yeah, he recognized a good script when he saw one, and really like what's funny is we just talked about how Spielberg wanted to like take out all of the monologues. So
I mean, yeah,
so it's kind of
oh man, Matheson. No disrespect, because I don't think I've read anything else that this guy wrote. But I
yeah,
mean, a good script. I mean, sure, but dude, it's a pretty basic story. Okay,
yeah,
the
yeah.
real strength of this film that I think we'll
It's
get to
visual.
is visual, and that's why
Hmm.
you can see Steven Spielberg's early talent with the shot choices and the. I don't want to get ahead of us, but yeah, just the way he visually approached this material is what really sold it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, let's jump into the production. So Universal gave him 11 days to shoot this 74-minute TV movie, which most of us that are familiar with movie shooting schedules are like, that is absolutely unbelievable. But for TV, that's actually like probably actually more time than usual. I would
Yeah,
think.
isn't that why
Um,
many filmmakers say they don't necessarily like working in TV, or maybe it's different now, but just kind of the
yeah.
speed that something needs to air at a certain point. I mean,
Hmm.
now with streaming, it seems like they just film a big long thing and then it's put into 10 episodes and
Yeah.
dumped on Netflix. It might be a little different now, but
Hmm.
back then, yeah, just the pace and the
Oh
I have
yeah,
it
because
done.
they're pumping them out.
Yeah,
They're just like pumping
breakneck
them
speed.
out one after the other. Yeah, yeah. It reminds me of like in Seinfeld. My wife and I are finishing up watching through Seinfeld again, and there's the period where they're making the show Jerry. the show about nothing. And there's all the talk about like we have hundreds of shows on the docket, and like we don't they don't need your show. He's like trying to convince George, like, they don't need us, we got to take what they give us. But yeah, it's just like that pace, like they're just pumping stuff out. But yeah, so the funny thing, this is another like just like testament to Spielberg's like just like how already smart he was at this young age. I want to say, so this was 71, so he would have been 24, 25, somewhere in there when he made this. Because he was born in 46, so yeah, 24 or 25. And
super
he
impressive.
wanted to shoot on location, which makes sense. It's a road movie. And Wallace Woolsey Jr. was the production manager. That was kind of like the middleman, like telling Spielberg what he needed to do, basically. And he was like, no, that's not how we do things. You go out there, you get your shots that we're going to put up behind the actors on set. Go out to location, get your shots, come back to the studio, and we'll shoot it in studio. And Spielberg was like, no, I'm not making it that way. And so
that 24-year-old putting his foot down. Good for him.
Yeah. And so Woolsey said, well, I'll tell you what, go out there. I'll give you 3 days. You shoot the way you want to shoot it on location, but you also need to get some location shots that we can project behind the actors in studio. But if you can stick to schedule in those 3 days, I'll let you finish shooting on location. And so they get out there, and so he basically meets enough of Woolsey's directives to get to stay on location. And we'll actually get to that in a second. But yeah, it was shot entirely in the San Fernando Valley on Highway 14, along, it says Soledad Canyon Road and Vasquez Canyon Road. And then there's the Man House, which is in Tallulah Lake, which is north of the Universal Studios. That's really the kind of only other location. The rest of it is all in that San Fernando Valley. And it did end up being like a 12 to 13 day shoot. So he did go a little bit over. But yeah, so how did he stick to that schedule and get this whole thing shot? This is what's really impressive, I think, is what's funny is you see this and how he basically stuck to this tight schedule for this movie. And then like when he started making feature films, he was known as the guy that goes over budget and over schedule. And it's just funny because you see this and you're like, oh, he does have the ability to like meticulously plan out everything.
Yeah.
So what he did is he basically like he got maps up on all the walls of his motel that he was staying in, tacked them up, a map for each day of where they were shooting. And he mapped out like drew on the maps like where they were shooting, where the camera placements were going to be, the movements of the cars, and it was just all planned out on all these maps for each day.
Wow.
And and then on top of that, he like used camera placement tricks kind of to up the efficiency of the shooting. So what he would do is he would find locations where on one side of the road there was like cliffs or rock faces or whatever, and then on the other side of the road it was like bare. And so they would just do 2 passes, one with the camera on one side of the road, the other on the other side of the road. So you basically get 2 locations in out of one location.
Oh man.
Yeah. And then on top of that, he wouldn't just do one camera. He would place like 5 cameras with different angles and stuff. So with each pass by of the cars, you're getting like 5 different shots that you can use in editing. Which is just like, it's just like, how did this kid like think up all of this stuff?
Genius.
Yeah. Um, and then of course, like he would have like several cameras mounted on different places on the Plymouth, which was the car that they used. David Weaver's the actor, and
Dennis Weaver.
he
Yeah.
Dennis Weaver.
David
Yeah,
Mann is the character.
David Mann, Dennis Weaver.
Yes, there you
David
go.
Mann is the character. I guess like that's maybe he was just such a good actor that he's melded both names into one for me.
There you go.
But yeah, it's just really impressive how efficient he was able to make that thing. Yeah, I don't know. I think of myself at 24 years old, and I'm like, yeah, I would have
No way.
lost.
Yeah. I might have thought that I could do it at 24, but once you get there, it's like, yeah, no, absolutely not.
And I guess what it boils down to is this kid had been like behind a camera since he was like 8 years old.
Yeah.
So I mean, like he's in the eyes of like Universal and the veteran people on set and stuff, like, oh, he's a kid, he's 24 years old, he's just a kid. But like in actuality, like if he were to have had a resume with all of the stuff he'd done, I mean, he'd been making films for, what would that be, 16 years.
Yeah.
So like in actuality, like he actually had a decent amount of experience. It just wasn't necessarily on a studio set.
Yeah. And it wasn't official education experience. It was him doing his own thing, telling his own stories, incorporating his family and friends and scout troops, as you talked about last episode, into what he was doing. So he was already, and it seemed like he was doing it all the time. I mean, he's a guy that it's like you got to love what you do. And when you love what you do, you just automatically put so many hours into it. You don't even really think about it. You're just doing it all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's impressive. And, you know, it was his escape too, from the kind of the struggles at home and the struggles at school. That it was his escape. And that's why he loved it, because it was a place for him to go and express himself. And you were talking about when you were talking about like growing up with Spielberg, how some of his movies like were scary and some of his movies were like full of wonder and awe. And I feel like it's just because those are the two reasons he started making films, is because like he was scared to face the things that were going on around him, but he also had this like imagination that would just run wild, and he wanted a place to like explore that too. And it's just, I feel like it's for someone that like grew up watching him and sees that, it's really cool. And yeah, it comes out when you're 24 years old and you already like are thinking on another level of how to like shoot this incredible feature TV film, like with great efficiency, and great quality too, really. Hi, quick reminder that you can be a huge help to the production of this show. If you visit establishingshotpod.com/donate, you'll find out how to join the Establishing Shot family through some giving tiers starting as low as $5 a month. You heard that right, only $5 a month. And not only will you be helping me keep the show going, but you'll also get some perks yourself, like early and ad-free episodes, bonus episodes, access to a Discord server where we can chat it up about the show and movies in general, and more. Might even let you choose a movie for me to review for the show. Check out that link in the show notes to learn more. Back to the show. But yeah, there's also the cars. The cars are major characters, I would say, in the movie. You have
Especially the
the
Tinker
red
Truck. Yeah.
Plymouth. Yeah, the red Plymouth was a big deal. They did not want a red car. Um, but as we'll see as we work through Spielberg's career, he likes making things pop with the color red. Um, and he was like, nope, I'm using the red car. um, and they actually used something too. This wouldn't have been something you would see on camera. It would be something behind the camera. It's called the Hustis car. And it was invented by Pat Hustis just a few years earlier for the movie Bullet,
Ooh,
with starring Steve McQueen. And it was basically a device that was mounted on the Hustis car, for filming like moving vehicles at a close, like in close view. So basically, the biggest example in the movie that I can think of is there's this shot where it starts like kind of almost behind the tanker truck, and the camera moves past the tanker truck and then even past the Plymouth and kind of swings around to give the view of like both of them together from the front. And the camera's pretty close to those vehicles as it's moving past. You feel like you're in a car, like right beside them. And that's that device. That's that Hustis car device, which is pretty cool. And really allows for some really great shots, I think.
yeah.
Uh,
I mean, this is a total visual movie, so you need something like that for sure.
yeah. Yeah. Um, and the truck. It's I was telling my wife earlier a little bit, like sometimes I unload some of the information in my head on her, um, and she still loves me, and so that's a good sign that I married the right person. But uh, but but yeah, I was telling her, imagine like being like, I'm going to work today. Oh, what are you doing at work today? Well, I'm going to look at a bunch of trucks to decide what truck I want to be in my movie. Um, yeah, that's what Spielberg did one day in pre-production. And he ended up picking a 1955 Peterbilt 281, which means absolutely nothing to me other than I know what it looks like because it's in the movie. Um, but maybe there's someone listening that knows about old tanker trucks, and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, I know that truck." Um, but but yeah, he picked it because the cab had kind of looks like a face,
Totally.
and yeah, it looks like a big menacing cartoon face. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah, the scene where David Mann, Dennis Weaver, stops to help
mm-hmm.
the bus that had broken down with all the kids outside.
Yeah,
The truck comes back and is sitting at the beginning of a dark tunnel, and you see the headlights turn on, and it's like a
mm-hmm.
monster in the dark looking at you.
Yeah,
And there is another shot as well where I'm trying to remember where in the movie this was, but Spielberg does a zoom up of one of the truck's lights, almost like it's an eye. Like it zooms up
yeah.
to a really extreme close up of just the headlight of this truck.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely making it into a monstrous type of creature.
Yeah, for sure. And what's funny is in the extra features, whenever anyone, including Steven, was talking about the truck, they talked about it as like a character in the movie, kind of like tongue in cheek, like as a joke, but also like very serious, like serious at the same time. Um, but yeah, and I even think at one point Spielberg's like, yeah, they would go every day and give the truck its makeup while the actors were getting their makeup, add some more dust and grease and oil and crushed up bugs. Um, and so, yeah, even the old tanker truck was getting its makeup done every day before shooting. And then it also has the license plates from different states,
I saw that.
which he
Yeah.
talked about. Yeah, he talked about it was kind of to give the impression that it was like a veteran of road crimes. Um,
Whoa, like
which,
like a serial killer claiming victims or
yeah,
something. Wow.
exactly.
Or
Yeah,
trophies,
that was like the
trophies of
idea.
the victims. Yeah.
Hmm.
Ugh,
Yeah.
that makes it. I
Yeah.
didn't know quite
Which
what to
is,
do with that other than like, oh, it's all these states, so it's like a universal type of monster or something. But that's very interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think he even, now that you said that, I think he did say like serial killer like sort of thing um, in the extra features were fun on the DVD. If you, another library shout out, I just checked it out at the library, and yeah, it's an interesting watch if you get your hands on that. But but yeah, the truck is awesome. Another fun fact about the truck, which this is kind of jumping to the end of the movie, which we will do if this is your first time listening to to a episode where we talk about the movies. We kind of jump around. It's definitely a spoiler podcast. But
This came out in
but yeah, when the truck,
1971. I mean, if you have not seen it yet,
yes, yeah, um, yeah, uh, yeah. When the truck goes over the cliff at the end, he actually used like the Godzilla style. Godzilla. I don't know if it was like modeled after Godzilla or if I can't remember if he actually used. I seem to remember he actually like used sounds from Godzilla to like roaring as the truck goes over. It's kind of like this like
yeah,
kind of thing. Um, and that was I thought that was a cool little like fun fact about the movie and the truck. And the fun fact that goes along with that is when he made Jaws, when which I'm going to rewatch this in the near future, so I'm going to be listening for it when
nice.
at the end of Jaws, when the shark is finally sinking, he reuses that same exact sound um, in that little sequence while the shark is sinking. And he said it's kind of like just a thank you to Duel for getting him started in his filmmaking career, which I thought was cool. Um, but yeah, as far as other production stuff goes, um, Dennis Weaver, which yeah, let's talk a little bit about. I'm going a little bit out of order in my notes, but I feel like it's appropriate. Dennis Weaver, who played the main character David Mann, he was cast. He done a good bit of TV work with shows like Gunsmoke and Coogan's Bluff, were two that I recognize the names of. And but what Spielberg chose him from was he in Hitchcock's I mean not Hitchcock's, in Orson Welles' movie Touch of Evil. um, Dennis Weaver plays this kind of like crazy hotel clerk, um, and that's like the role Steven was like, I want that guy. and Universal got him to sign on, and he actually did like a lot of the driving stunt work in the movie,
Right
which
on.
is impressive. There was definitely like some stuntman work done,
Sure.
as is necessary. Um, but yeah, he did a lot of it, and he even did the scene where he's in the phone booth and the truck is like coming to like comes and like busts through that gas station lady's
Oh,
phone booth and
wow.
reptiles. He actually was in the phone booth. They had like they choreographed it, and timed it just right, where he actually was in the phone booth and as the truck was coming and like dove out at just the right time.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow. Well,
Like
that's the.
I think they
I
go
was going
ahead.
to say, yeah. So that's the maybe the benefit of not having a huge star is some guys
Yeah.
gonna come on set and just be like, you know what? I'm gonna do all this stuff. I don't care. Like I'm gonna drive the
Right.
car. Yeah, let's have this truck barrel down on me and I'll just dive out of the way. I mean, good for Dennis Weaver. And
Yeah.
it's a great performance. I know you said
It is.
earlier that there weren't any major stars attached to this, and I think Spielberg probably
Mhm.
realized they weren't going to get a Steve McQueen or a
Yeah.
who else was big back then? I mean, any of the major actors of the day. But
Mhm.
Spielberg in his mind is like, you know what? I love Touch of Evil, and this guy was incredible. Let's get him. He can do this.
Yeah.
And so that's
Yeah.
Dennis Weaver. That's really cool.
Yeah. I think he was like drawn to just the way that he carried emotion, like, like not just emotion, but like extreme emotion, um, which like really comes out, in all those close ups
Yeah.
of his face. Um, and yeah, he did a lot of the driving. Um, the other so there's other casts. I didn't really like write a lot of them down. It's mostly TV actors, that I didn't really recognize. Like if you look at their IMDb or Letterboxd, profile, you'll see a few movies that you'll like recognize for a few of them, but even in those, they're just kind of like very low level roles, like supporting roles. Um, but the other important person is the truck driver, who really all you see is like his arm and his hand and boot at one point.
He's got some cowboy boots
And
on.
that, yep. That was Carrie Lofton, who was a stunt truck driver. He he had done a lot of good, like big stunt work for Bullet that we mentioned, and then The French Connection, and also the movie Vanishing Point were three of his like big ones that he did stunt work for. Um, and yeah, just he does some impressive stuff with that truck. It's super impressive. Because I mean, this is all just real. It's all real driving. It's all real. Like there's not any CGI. Like
Yeah.
it's all real. Um,
And
and
that's part of why it's so great. That's why it stands the
yes,
test of time, is just the look of it. Yeah.
yes, yeah. And I mean, like the guy, Woolsey Jr., the guy that told Spielberg, like, no, you got to shoot on set. Like, I bet when he watched it, he felt so dumb. Like,
Oh yeah.
like what?
He's like, this totally
Because I mean,
worked. Wow.
yeah, it's incredible. Another thing they did for, which will, okay, I'll save this for when we talk about the monologues. The score, was done by a guy named Billy Goldenberg, who I thought the score was actually like kind of sneakily pretty good in this movie. It's not in your face, like it's not playing all the time. It's played very like efficiently, it seems like.
Yeah. It's not one that gets
Um,
stuck in your head at all.
no,
It's like you leave
no.
you get up from watching the movie and you probably forget about it. But I think that's a good description. While it's there, it works.
hmm and I think you don't remember it because it's very like experimental. It's a lot of like weird drums and African instruments, and um, yeah, it's just like kind of strange sound. It's almost like, it's not so much music as like sound that goes along with like the tension of the moment. Um, and yeah, it blends like kind of right in with everything else, um, which is something Spielberg talks about, is like sound being kind of like a secret sauce when it comes to movies.
Oh yeah.
It's like the thing where if you can get the hand of the movie to fit in the glove of the sound just right, then like it takes it to the next level. Which I think like for like just a small budget TV movie, like the sound in this is really good.
Yes. I think
It like really impressive.
yeah, there's so many moments that stick out in my mind, but there is one especially where David Mann, Dennis Weaver, is kind of hiding out by train tracks and he falls asleep.
Mhm.
And you hear just the
Yeah.
roar of the
Mhm.
train just coming right by him. I mean, you think it's the truck because you hear this horn and this rumble, but it's just the
Yeah.
train and he's sitting there. But then as the train goes on and he leaves, the movie goes to almost silence because the camera's like high up on a cliff or something. You see the car driving
Yeah.
down below, and just that contrast between really loud and in your face, and then kind of
Mm-hmm.
silent, like it's lulling you into, kind of a peace and safety. But here the truck is just going to be down the road waiting for him or whatever.
Yeah.
Really, I mean, you see the thoughtfulness of how to really employ sound to get the overall
Mm-hmm.
thriller aspect of this film.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's funny you say that, because actually the sound you hear right before the train blasts by is actually the sound of the truck. So they took the sound of the truck and it's like a mind trick
Yeah,
that he pulls with the sound. And so because I did the same thing, I was like, when the train blares by, I was like, I could have swore that was the sound of the truck, but I guess my mind was playing tricks on me. And then I watched the extra features, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we used the sound of the truck right up into the point where the train goes by to kind of play with your head,"
messing with everybody's
which is
minds, including Dennis Weaver.
yeah, which is something. Which two things that I talked about in the overview that Spielberg does, one of which relates to that, and one relates to what you were talking about. Um, I talked about this. It was actually a Studio Binder YouTube video that I watched where the guy introduces this idea of Spielberg's point of thought instead of point of view. And that's a great example of that, where the sound you're hearing is actually like not a point of view, but it's a point of like thought. It's a thought in his head that this is the truck approaching, and it's putting you in the mind of the character, so that in order to like give you his perspective, not necessarily his point of view visually, but like in his mind what he's hearing, which I think is really cool. And then two, kind of something Spielberg does with sound that you mentioned. It's not just in this movie, but he does a lot of contrasting with like loud and quiet, like all throughout his filmmaking career. That's like kind of a sound motif that you'll see, is that contrast, and it's used for narrative purposes and tension building, just like you were saying. And it's already there. Like all these things are like all of these like Spielberg distinctives are like already there right here in this first movie. But yeah, so he finishes the movie. We'll talk about the finale later, but he finishes shooting, and then he only had 3.5 weeks to edit, and so he actually had like 5 different editors editing different parts of the movie simultaneously. So he's kind of like,
Whoa.
he says like, and he talked about how in those 3 weeks, like he basically like didn't sleep. He was like constantly going back and forth between all the editors, like giving input, like seeing things they had put together. And
Yeah.
just like, man, I can't imagine. But it was all worth it. It came out on TV in 1971 on ABC, and Barry Diller, who was the ABC kind of head honcho that I touched on earlier, he saw it and he was like, "Oh, this is a real movie." Like, I guess it stuck out because a lot of the TV movies they were putting out for this movie of the weekend, like you could kind of tell were TV movies.
Sure.
But he saw this and he was like, "Oh, we have a real movie on our hands." And so the kind of like audience reception was like really good, but not like record breaking. So it's basically like it did what they would want it to do. Like it did really good, but like didn't blow the views out of the water or anything. Which I guess makes sense. It's a TV movie. Like,
Well, no one knew who Spielberg was at this point. Dennis Weaver was not a huge star. So when you think of what's going to draw somebody to this, they probably, I mean, it makes sense they got what they're looking for, I guess.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But the people that were blown away were the critics, which makes total sense. They were, I wrote down like a few things that I read. They were impressed with the audacity of the concept, They were impressed with the mastery of suspense, the kind of Western worthy wide shots that he pulls off, um, the experimental score, which we talked about, they enjoyed. And then they even talked about the lack of an explosion at the end, the avoiding that cliche as something that was like really impressive. And we can probably bunny trail off and talk about that.
Yeah.
The executives, the Universal executives, they saw the first draft of this movie, and they were like, okay, our only note is basically we want you to go back and reshoot the truck exploding. And Spielberg was like, he was like, is just another like, I'm putting my foot down. Like, no, like
Good for
I
him.
shot that for the raw like sound that you get, the quietness, the feeling of like a beast has been killed,
Slade.
and
Yeah, Slade.
now everything is calm and silent. And
Yep.
you know you get that quiet effect of like the oil dripping off the steering wheel like the blood of a beast, which is just an incredible visual image.
I love the
And
shot of the cameras kind of down, maybe toward the ground at an up angle, and it's like you're looking
mhm,
through the gap of the truck cab and the tanker, and there's that wheel
yeah,
that's spinning, and it slowly
yeah,
stops spinning, but you're looking through like a gap in the cab, and you see Dennis
mhm,
Weaver up on the cliff, like really far away.
yeah.
It's super, super impressive, and it does give
It's
the feeling of a, like you said, a beast being slayed. And I think,
mhm,
going into a theme of the movie, which we may get to later, but, Spielberg has said this is about the mechanics of society, like, machines almost overtaking human beings. And this was the early 70s, and this was before James Cameron did the Terminator movies.
mhm.
So I think super impressive with what he was seeking to even thematically communicate with some of those shots.
Oh yeah, and that the composite, like just like the grasp on how to frame and compose a shot like that at that age is just like incredible. Like because that is, I mean, that's the sort of shot you would expect any great filmmaker to like have in their movie. It's like one of those shots where like, oh, the latest Scorsese movie comes out and there's a shot like that, and you're like, oh yeah, like this is the man doing his like knocking it out of the park. And it's like that level of like composition in the shot
Yeah,
at 24.
only
Just
24.
super impressive. Yeah. Yeah, he definitely was 24 because his birthday was in December, so he wouldn't have been turned 25 yet. Um, yeah, the other cool thing about that truck, um, that like climax of the truck dying, is he had like 7 cameras, I want to say, set up because it was like a one take. Basically, like I mean,
Oh,
you can't wreck the truck; you only
yeah.
get one shot. So he had 7 cameras capturing it, which was like unheard of in TV to have 7 cameras capturing one shot. Um, but when they were editing, he actually only used one of the cameras. So there's that. When you watch the movie, you'll notice like there's it's a one shot take of it going down. Like it follows the truck going down, and then it stays on it. There's like some dust that
A
like
whole lot of
obviously
dust.
billows up, a whole lot of dust, and the camera stays on it, and then the dust clears and you see the truck. And that was just one camera that he used for that. So out of the 7 cameras, he actually only used one, of the shots for that final thing. It was just like it captured it perfectly.
Hmm.
So big props to whoever was operating that camera. I don't know if it was the DP or some, just podunk camera operator, but big, shout out to that guy. We may never know, because they didn't really say who it was in the extra features. But yeah, the DP was, I had it in my notes somewhere, but I don't know where it is. Um, I don't have the DP's name, or I might be thinking of something else. Anyways, uh, yeah, it really is an incredible shot. That final climactic sequence, and the critics loved it. In fact, like I noted that several top publications of the time were like musing on this being or not this was the best TV movie of all time, which I don't think I've seen that many like made for TV movies, but it's probably the best of all the ones I've seen. I
Yeah,
grew up in the Disney Channel original movie era, and so those are probably most of the TV movies I've seen are probably those.
it's safe to say
And
it
it's definitely
probably,
better than all those.
yeah, it would probably compete for the top slot of best TV movie prior to streaming. Now that we have streaming and stuff gets
Sure.
directly released,
Yeah.
but
It's a different
it's just
game.
the whole industry has really changed. But as far as I think in the 80s and 90s they still kind of had ABC movies of the week and stuff on Sunday nights.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen a lot of them either because the bits and pieces of them I have
No.
seen have never been too good for me to keep watching it. But Duel is definitely something where you start and you're like, oh man, I'm gonna keep going.
Mhm.
I'm gonna keep this on.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And so the TV release was actually 74 minutes. And Universal was like, like I said, they were like, this is a real movie. We've got to do something with this. And so they decided that they wanted to give it a theatrical release in Europe. But at that time, apparently, if you had like, it was like 90 minutes or bust. So if your movie wasn't 90 minutes, then they weren't going to run it theatrically, I guess, over in Europe.
Interesting.
So yeah, so in March of 72, they had Spielberg go shoot 15 extra minutes of footage for the movie. So they added they really just kind of added three sequences. One of which you already mentioned, which is the school bus sequence. That was added for the 90-minute version, which I didn't watch I didn't watch the 74-minute version. I watched the theatrical version, which is like 89 or 90 minutes.
Me too. I've only ever seen that one.
And yeah, and really but I was already aware of which sequences were added. So I was kind of thinking about that while I was watching. I was like, does this really, like, the scenes that are added are just kind of like extra tension scenes. They're just another scene of tension.
Yeah.
It was that bus scene, the scene where the truck is like pushing him towards a train that's passing in front of them.
Oh, okay.
That was added for the theatrical run. And then there's the scene it's kind of towards the beginning where he stops, where he goes into the gas station and calls his wife, and has the conversation with his wife. That was the one that like Spielberg didn't really want to add. But like Eckstein, the producer, was kind of like pushing him to like add something like that. And so those were the three sequences that they added to get the 15 extra minutes for the theatrical run. So I thought that was interesting, because two of the scenes are actually like really good, like tension building scenes. And then one of them, the one that Spielberg didn't really want to do, was probably like the most unnecessary one.
Well, yeah, I think that one I could see for like building Dennis Weaver's character out a little bit more. Just that he and his wife had a fight the night before, and now he's taking this long like sales trip. So I guess it adds because the story itself is just so bare bones. I think that scene just adds more to the audience relating with David Mann, with Dennis Weaver's character. Maybe, I mean, I guess maybe in Spielberg's mind, I don't know for sure. I guess I can speculate that maybe Spielberg literally just wanted a nonstop thriller. I mean, not even bothering with this kind of stuff. Like he looks at the material and he's like, none of this is necessary. I just want like car chase, truck
Yeah.
chase, and that's it. But I my main problem, as I mentioned before, is mostly just with the interior monologue stuff. I didn't
Right.
mind that scene at all with his wife.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I feel similarly. It kind of adds a little bit of like relatability for sure of like, oh yeah, this guy has problems at home, kind of, you know, oh yeah, everybody's had those times sort of
Yeah, for
thing.
sure.
Um, but yeah, so it got released in the UK in October of 72. That kind of kicked off its theatrical run in Europe and then ended up playing kind of all over. It actually won the Grand Prix at the first ever Avoriaz International Film Festival in France. And it also won Best First Film at the Taormina Film Festival in Italy. I'm probably pronouncing both of those wrong, but that's okay. Um, and so yeah, it won some European prizes at some film festivals, which is impressive. And then Spielberg actually got to go to Rome to present the movie when it was released there in Rome, and it was his first time out of the country. This at this point, I guess he would have been like 20. He was probably 26 at this point. But yeah, first time out of the country, you get to go to Rome and present your feature film, at a premiere or whatever. Just
Unreal.
like it's got to be. I just can't imagine. Like I'm 32, and I just feel like if that happened to me now, I would be like just swimming. I wouldn't know what to do. It would just be surreal. And I'm
Yeah.
sure it was. And then on top of that, one morning when he was in Rome, he was dragged out of bed. Someone, came and got him and woke him up and was like, "Hey, there's someone that wants to see you," and it's Federico Fellini,
Oh my
who wants
lord.
to congratulate him on the film,
This.
and just like, the Italian filmmaker Federico Fellini.
Yeah,
Um,
and he came. He wanted to congratulate the guy who made Duel, which
yeah,
Duel is a really fun movie. Don't get me wrong, but Fellini's making stuff like 8.5 or what Dolce
exactly.
Vita. That's one of Roger Ebert's
Hmm.
favorite films. I think when he was here with us.
Yeah,
That's great. I mean,
yeah.
I think Fellini, recognizing talent or young filmmakers or
Mhm.
encouraging young filmmakers. That's I think that's a cool aspect of him.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And it's just like really cool. Like, I mean, it's got to be so surreal to like get woken up and be like, who's here to see me? Fellini? No, whatever. And going downstairs and it's like, oh, it's Federico Fellini.
Am I
I'm
still
just some
dreaming?
kid.
What's happening?
Yeah. Yeah. Am I in 8.5 in a dream sequence? What's going on? Um, but it's got to be crazy. But yeah, another crazy thing that happened in Rome was he was doing like a press conference with journalists and stuff, and they were basically like trying to read this kind of socio-political interpretation into the film, and Spielberg was like adamant that they were wrong, that was not what the film was about, and they got mad and left. They just like got up and left. And it's I thought that was hilarious. He I think it was I think it was like they were reading this like American class warfare into it. Um, and Spielberg was like, I learned that not everyone sees the same movie in the same way. Um, and then too, I remember in the extra features, he talked about how it kind of haunted him because he went on to make the Sugarland Express, which is another kind of like road movie with some down on their luck people. And goes to Europe and they're doing the same thing. They're like reading the same like class warfare thing into it. He's like, no, that's not what I'm making movies about. Yeah, I just thought that was really funny. One more fun fact before we move into some key points that I thought people might think is interesting is that there were in 1978 they reused some shots from Duel in the show The Incredible Hulk. And yeah, in 1978. So this is, I mean, Jaws is out, Close Encounters is out. So I mean, Spielberg's like the guy now, and they're like, yeah, we're going to use shots of Duel in The Incredible Hulk. And like I want to say like him and his people tried to like put it into it, but they couldn't because it was in his Universal contract that they could do whatever they want with it.
That's just so cheap, man. Like,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But yeah, that's a fun fact. So maybe you can, if you're a fan of The Incredible Hulk, maybe you can go find that 1978 episode with shots of Duel in it. I didn't have time to do that, but if you're out there listening and you find it, establishingshotpod@gmail.com, email me the link and I'll go check it out.
There you go. I never saw that show, but it is, I guess, kind of famous. I hear about it all the time.
Sure. Yeah.
I guess the Hulk versus a big tanker truck. There you go.
Yeah, I don't know. I was trying to imagine like what shots did they use? Is it just like a chase sequence they like kind of cut in, or I was just
weird,
like,
man.
I don't. Yeah. But yeah, it's man, it launched his career, which is really impressive. Hello again. Do you know how you can really support the show for free in just a few minutes or less? That's right. Just leave a rating and review on Spotify and Apple, or wherever you listen that might allow for ratings and reviews. These really help the visibility of the podcast. In fact, just hit that pause button right now and drop the review right now. And then you can get back to the show. I'd greatly appreciate it. Okay. I trust that you went and left that rating and review now. Back to the show. Let's kind of jump into just some key points and like just Spielberg's techniques and themes. What were the main things that stood out to you watching this of like kind of the camera work and what Spielberg was doing filmmaking wise that you noticed like, oh, this is very Spielberg-y, the way this is shot?
Yeah, I think I think he loved John Ford, and it's impossible to get away from the Western motif of this movie, even in the title, Duel. And I think there's maybe off the top of my head, I mean, I just rewatched the film actually today. There's two different shots that, well, maybe three that kind of conjure that Western type of genre for me. And a couple of them are at the very end. One of them is, sorry, this is another impressive shot where I think it might be right after the train track episode that happens in the movie, and David Mann is driving, and he sees the truck, and he is pulling his car up to a stop, and the camera again is at this upward angle. It's down low, below almost the hood of the car, and you see David Mann like staring down the tanker truck. And it is one of those Western motifs of like the good guy is surveying the bad guy, surveying the scene, and okay, we're going to have a showdown soon. He's realizing he is not going to escape this truck unless he takes it directly on. And then the other shot, I think, is literally toward the end once he gets up at, I think it's Mystery Mesa off the Vasquez Highway Road you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And he's waiting for the truck to come through this little farm gate to get out toward where the cliff is. And there's a shot, and it's editing as well, where you have like three quick cuts as it zooms quickly up to David Mann's face, Dennis Weaver's face. And that's, I think, another kind of Western motif where the zoom up comes close on his face as they're staring down. They're about to have this duel at the end. The truck is coming up, coming headlong to the Plymouth. They're having that big showdown, and we're reaching like the climax of the movie. So that's another Western motif. And then also after the truck has cascaded over the cliff and victory has been secured by our protagonist, there's a sunset over a Western looking vista where Mystery Mesa off this highway road where they filmed it. So all of that probably, I don't know if I know enough about John Ford's career and stuff like that, but John Ford was so huge in cinema history, just like Spielberg, making Westerns, that I'm sure a lot of that is homage to stuff that John Ford was doing with his actors, or sometimes mostly with John Wayne. So Spielberg was into that, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And I know John Ford was a huge influence on Spielberg for sure. That I love that sunset shot. And am I remembering, because it's been a couple weeks actually since I watched it, am I remembering correctly that they have Dennis Weaver like silhouetted in the sunset?
Yeah,
I'm imagining that.
Yeah, I think it's if I remember right, gosh, I just watched it today. I think he is silhouetted, or it's heavily shadowed. The high contrast lighting that Spielberg often does there. And there's another, it's very red with the sunset. And later on in Spielberg's career, when he does War Horse, which I think people are kind of mixed as to whether they like that movie or not, but at the very end, I remember seeing an interview with Steven Spielberg where he said, I did this ending scene in War Horse to basically pay homage to John Ford. And it's a very red scene where the horse is coming back to the stable or the farm, I think, where he had once found his home. And so it's kind of like that Western homecoming. So these motifs are all throughout Spielberg's movies.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I love that shot. It reminds you of like the iconic Indiana Jones shot when they're digging in Raiders. I love that's one of my favorite like Indiana Jones shots. And so it reminded me of that a bit. I guess just the landscape and the sunset and all that. I like that you mentioned that, because that wasn't something that I had noted. I didn't really like think a whole lot about the Western aspect, but that's definitely a huge influence here. The other big one I think is Hitchcock. It's almost like John Ford meets this movie is John Ford meets Hitchcock.
There you go.
It's a Western with the dual aspect, but then like you have the Hitchcock aspect of like the way that tension is built and the mystery of the truck driver. Like you never see the truck driver, only giving as much information as that's needed at that time. Keeping as much from the viewer as possible until the very last second. It's just like all of those are like very Hitchcock things. The kind of like holding the bomb under the table idea that Hitchcock talks about. It's impressive. The scene that like I think about is actually a scene out of the car when he's in the little cafe and he's sitting there like looking at all the people. Like that is such an intense sequence. And I would say like Spielberg might just be like it's kind of just a nitpick because I do love the sequence, but he might there's that sequence and maybe one or two car chases that he might drag a little bit too far, drag on the tension a little too far, where you kind of like lose the momentum. And I think that might be just an aspect of an early career, like not knowing exactly when is the point to like break the tension. It's one thing that I noted, like thinking about it kind of critically. But yeah, it really is like it's John Ford meets Hitchcock in a movie. Yeah, and I think Spielberg even mentioned thinking about Hitchcock's The Birds and Psycho when he was making this, which you can totally see.
Yes.
Except for the really bad bird effects. There's none of that here.
Right.
I don't know when the last time you watched The Birds is, but I actually watched it like a few months ago, and like anytime there was like a bunch of birds flying around, it made me laugh, and I was like, I'm not supposed to be laughing at this, but
I'm supposed to be terrified. Oh, it's been decades.
Yeah, the bird effects were comical to me.
It's been decades since I've seen that Hitchcock movie. I should revisit it.
Yeah, it's a good movie, but the special effects have not aged well. Yeah. I wrote down some like intriguing images that kind of like are, I guess you could say, foreshadowing of the sorts of images that Spielberg creates. You mentioned one earlier with that composition of the shot with the wheels turning and man in the background. Really good. I think you even mentioned like some of the low angle stuff that he did.
Yes.
He does a lot of like low angle shots, which are,
it communicates something so big like, coming at you, like something. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It amplifies, I guess, the stakes, those low angle shots. And even like he even used low angle shots of mixed with close-ups. There's the shots that are almost like from the steering wheel, kind of like looking up at man's face, which there was one time where it was like sitting on him, and I'm like, man, I'm glad the makeup people like cleaned out his nose, because you're like basically like looking up his nostrils.
Yeah.
But yeah, he does those. The close-ups are a big thing. That dude knows how to like build character with a close-up. And I even like, I talked about, he does that really well, even in some of his TV stuff. His episode of Columbo has some of that. Even if you go all the way back to his very first work, which it was on Night Gallery, in the pilot episode, he did one of the segments, and it's called Eyes. And there's like these close-ups of Joan Crawford that are like really good, like really well done close-ups. Yeah, those are definitely in here, all throughout. You have one of the things that I thought was kind of just funny, like a funny fun fact, was Spielberg himself actually operated the camera in the backseat of the car. So you have those shots, looking up through. And when they went to start doing the theatrical run, they were obviously adding the extra sequences and, kind of re-looking at the film. And because they were going to be projecting this in wider aspect ratios, there was actually a couple shots where Spielberg, you could see him a little bit in the back seat from like one of the angles outside the driver window.
Oh, no.
And so they had to take those segments and like blow up the film so that it could fit the format and cut Spielberg out of the shot. But there is still one spot in the movie where you can see Spielberg, and it's in the reflection of the phone booth. So Spielberg is standing outside of this phone booth, kind of giving man notes as he's like on the phone in the phone booth, and you can, like, if you look closely, I didn't notice it while I was watching, but I saw it in like the special features. They kind of showed it and talked about it.
Okay. I didn't notice it either.
You can faintly see like his reflection of him like standing there, like giving Dennis Weaver notes, which I thought was great. And then we already kind of talked about sound.
Yeah.
The sound in this is phenomenal. That climactic sequence, the sound is like just like vital and important. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about character motifs. I don't know if you've looked in my notes, but was there anything? So I think there was a couple of things that I noticed as far as like character motifs that that you see here, that kind of follow him through his a lot of his films. And I was wondering if you might have seen something different than me. So I was wondering what kind of motifs you saw as far as like character and even maybe storytelling,
Cool.
that
Yeah.
felt like very close to Spielberg.
Yeah, I think the character's name is David Mann, and man kind of versus a machine, even though this is definitely not a science fiction type of movie at all. I think the theme of a man versus a bigger machine of some sort is in other Spielberg films as well. Even if you want to go like super metaphor to Schindler's List, one guy versus a cruel, sadistic machine of Nazi Germany and what Nazi Germany was doing. So I think Spielberg's always had the hero that's trying to be righteous and make righteous decisions under extraordinary circumstances. You kind of have that here in your notes. That's a common theme. I mean, maybe going outside of common theme a little bit and circling back around to that opening shot, which Spielberg apparently put it in the movie, and it was his idea, kind of as the credits are going. And some people may be like, why is that in there? Because it's essentially a camera attached to the front of Dennis Weaver's car, and we don't even see the car. We just see what the driver sees as he, it's dark. We hear the car start. The car comes out of the garage, and then it's in this suburban type of neighborhood, and then eventually driving through downtown Los Angeles and then out into the Mojave Desert. And I got to thinking, why would Spielberg put a shot like this in here? And it's totally obviously just setting the scene. This is going to be a car chase movie. This is a car movie. But I started thinking about it, as I do sometimes, because I just kind of nerd out. I started thinking about this in a deeper kind of way. And I don't know if all of this was on Spielberg's mind, but I have to think that maybe some of it was. And it's kind of the idea of what this open road represents to Americans, right? So the camera's on the front of the car. You see this open road. David Mann is driving to a sales meeting or whatever he's going to. And the sense of freedom that gets invoked in our minds when we talk about an open road type of scenario, right? Like we had the GI Bill in the 1940s. The suburbs are expanding. Eisenhower comes into office, and I think it was like 1956, he does the Interstate Highway Act, where now there's freeways and highways going everywhere. So we all can travel better. We can have our goods more efficiently delivered. And, Jack Kerouac is writing On the Road, the great all-time American classic book. And so people just think of this is good. This is freedom. We can go and drive and do whatever we want, and it's just this wonderful thing. And it is those things. But Spielberg is here to remind us there's also a dark side to this, and there's potentially terror out there. There's potentially evil out there as well. And I think that's what really get under someone's skin watching this movie, because now, several decades removed, we've all heard of the nasty road rage incidents. We've all heard of the
Yeah.
evil. With good things often comes a dark underside, and that's where Spielberg is playing on those motifs. And going back to Hitchcock,
Yeah.
that's where he's getting that inspiration.
Yeah, for sure. And it also reminds me too of just hearing about how he read the script, and it brought memories of like being bullied, and how like, yeah, the open road represents freedom, but also like not everyone, it doesn't represent the same kind of freedom for everyone. For him,
Yeah,
as a Jewish boy growing up in like post World War II America, like, yes, he had a nice suburban home in a nice suburban neighborhood, but he was the only person like himself in a lot of these suburban neighborhoods that he lived in. And the freedom that most people were enjoying in the suburbs was not afforded to him because people saw him as other, as different.
yeah,
And I can't help but think that maybe that's part of what is kind of ingrained in what you're talking about, the open road, also that freedom that this expanding America is supposed to represent is also like, it's maybe not for everyone. And I think even
yeah,
today, in our modern times, we're coming to terms with how like freedoms and privileges that a lot of us, you and I are both, white American males, like privileges that we've enjoyed aren't necessarily enjoyed by everyone in America, even today. And that's something you have to reckon with. And that's something that was very real for this Jewish kid in post World War II America. And so, yeah, that stuff is all like under the surface for sure. Um, no, I mean, who knows? We might go to a press conference in Europe and express those ideas, and Spielberg might tell us like, no, it's just a car chase movie. Um, but you can't help but think about that stuff when you're watching a movie like this,
yeah.
especially in hindsight, thinking about one of the greatest, filmmakers of all time. Um,
Yeah, I think
yeah,
he
and
has come out and has said, yeah, it's a man against machine movie. I think he has allowed at
sure,
least that aspect of it, but I don't.
yeah,
There's a lot of filmmakers who are very they don't want to make a big pretentiousness out of it. I guess
yeah,
I think of Peter
yeah,
Weir with the Truman Show, and I do think there's a lot of deeper things going on with the Truman Show. But I think Peter Weir was on
sure,
record of saying, "Hey, it's about a guy trapped in a TV show. That's it."
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and Spielberg is very like, I kind of talked about it in the overview. He's like very much like against being pretentious about
Yeah,
your films, which I appreciate. And so, but then there's also the aspect of like, well, when you make art and you put it out in the world, like people, it's kind of out of your hands at that point. So it's left to guys like you and me sitting on a podcast musing about it to decide what it's about, I guess.
oh yeah,
Um, but yeah, and you kind of mentioned it, and we've hit on it, but just like that motif of ordinary sort of man, which I think that opening sequence also puts us in the mindset of like, oh, this is just a guy that lives in a house in the suburbs,
yeah,
um, and like the phone call, oh, like you see his wife and kids, it's just a normal guy
yeah.
on the road. It's an ordinary man that's put in an extraordinary circumstance. And what is he going to do what is he going to do as an ordinary man once he's put in this situation? And that's just like, if you want to put his career in a thematic nutshell, that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Like ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. Like that's what Spielberg makes.
Yep.
Um, and you got to love it, you know.
I do. I have my
But
whole life.
yeah. And the other thing I had noted was just like he did add those kind of some key details to the character, and it provokes both like professional and familial insecurities, which are definitely like things that Spielberg deals a lot with in his films in the future. Just kind of those families that are fractured in some way. And then, you know, just kind of like the insecurities that you deal with in your professional and personal life are definitely like kind of under the surface in this, for sure. Hello there, listener. Don't you ever want more for your life? Don't you ever dream of surpassing the status of just podcast listener? Well, I've got good news. If you head on over to establishingshotpod.com and click the send a voicemail button on the right side of your screen, you can be featured on the podcast. I'd love to hear from you, whether it's a comment in response to an episode you liked, an opinion of mine you disagreed with, or just a question for me. And if you're too shy to have your voice featured, you can always email me at establishingshotpod@gmail.com. Don't settle for just being a podcast listener. Reach for the stars and get featured on The Establishing Shot. Back to the show. Let's touch briefly on the monologues, because you mentioned that was your big critique. I thought personally some of them were fine, and then some of them were just like, man, it's too on the nose. It's dragging on for too long. But yeah, what were your thoughts on them?
I guess I don't have it in my mind if there was. Well, yeah, let's back up. I just wonder if any of them were necessary. And I wonder if, you know, Spielberg being a first-time filmmaker, with monologues, there's always a question of, do you have to have a monologue, or is it something you can show with the camera? And I'm wondering how much of the lines in the monologue could have actually just been shown with the camera, and or how you edit the movie. I think that was my critique of it. Because yeah, I think you're right. Some of the stuff, especially in the diner, is on the nose. You can show Dennis Weaver sweating and like looking at people and cut it like really quickly to kind of give that anxiety type of feeling. You know, I just
it's kind of redundant.
Yes, a lot of it is
in that cafe sequence, because it is like you said, you can show some of that stuff visually, and actually, like if you turn off the sound, like he is showing it visually.
Yes.
And then you're getting it, you know, in the inner monologue at the same time, and it's kind of redundant. And you know, it's just one of those things. Like it might just be like it's his first TV movie. There's only so much that he can get away with. And you know, you kind of have to like satisfy someone at some point. Which, you know, he's not Steven Spielberg yet.
Yeah,
he's just some kid.
You said he wanted to cut the monologues, so I think he wanted maybe to show. He's like, oh, I can just show this stuff with the camera. This is ridiculous. But Matheson had wrote the script, and the executives were like, nope, you got to have that in there. So must have been one of the arguments he lost.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, that's really all I had. I mentioned another critique was, you know, some of the tension building goes on a little bit too long, but really those are the only critiques I had, and just kind of like, they're just kind of like nitpicks, I guess. And it's a really enjoyable movie.
Agreed.
Yeah. I'll touch very briefly on his other two TV movies.
Okay. I've not seen either one.
Yeah. So Duel came out in 1971, and then the next year, it was kind of like in the contemporary horror movie craze of the early 1970s. You had Rosemary's Baby come out, and then The Exorcist kind of like put a stamp on horror movies are the way to go. if you want to do well commercially. And yeah, he made Something Evil. It was something that he wasn't like super interested in, but they pulled him in for it. And yeah, you kind of get a few Spielberg distinctives with like, just his unusual kind of shots for TV, like the handheld stuff, the low angle stuff, the wide shots that he captures of this kind of like house in the middle of nowhere. Uh, and and then like some recurring motif themes like pre-adolescent rebellion and an absent father, um, 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 a loving mother, all those kind of like Spielberg motifs are in there. And really like it's not that great of a movie. um, it wasn't very successful. Spielberg even came out later and said in his career and said that he didn't care much for it himself. um, but this was just another example of he he loved the critics loved his technique. um, and yeah, you can go watch it on YouTube. um, Something Evil and Savage are both on YouTube, and you can just pull them up and watch them. They're not like super high quality, but they are there. That's how I watched it. Yeah, with his second one, well, actually, a third TV movie was Savage. After Duel and Something Evil in '73, he put out Savage. This was like his last straw, I guess, TV movie. It's the guys that made Columbo wrote this. And Sid Sheinberg, who was the guy that hired him originally, was kind of like the guy behind it, along with Lincoln Levison, the script writers. And the guys that wrote the script, who I guess they really liked Spielberg because he did so well with that Columbo episode, they really wanted him to direct this. And Sheinberg kind of saw it as like, oh, this is a potential pilot for a great new show. And so they pulled Spielberg in, and Spielberg was like, I'm not doing another TV movie. I'm done with all this. At this point, Duel was like, had started its run in Europe. It was really successful. He was like, I'm on my way out of here. And Scheinberg basically was like, I'm going to suspend you if you don't do this movie. And so Spielberg was like, fine. And he made it. It's fine. It has Martin Landau is the main guy in it, and he made appearances in movies like probably the biggest one would be like North by Northwest. He was in, and then he was one of the agents in the Mission Impossible show, and so he's a pretty well known guy. But yeah, Spielberg. I will say this about it. Spielberg really like had fun with the camera. He did a lot of like it's set like on a TV set. So this guy Savage is he basically has like a TV show, a journalistic TV show. And so he like is chasing stories and whatnot. And yeah, it's interesting. He does like the intro is like on this TV set. And so it's like going through the set, and it's like going through cables, and like you see like all the monitors and people moving around and rushing to get everything ready. And it's kind of like, it's almost like this behind the scenes of a TV set shot. It's actually like, I think I wrote in my notes, like he's doing a little too much because there's a ton of cuts, and it's just like, it's like a whirlwind of like all of the possible camera movements and stuff he could possibly fit in in this one little intro sequence. But I want to, with the context of him, like knowing that this is probably the last TV movie he's going to make, I think he was just like, I'm going to do as many like shots that I think are interesting and that I want to do as possible.
Just experiment,
yeah,
man. Get it out of the way. Yeah.
yeah, and you know he does some of the like big Spielberg distinctives that he's real at this point. He's like is actually really doing well with is one thing called rack focus, which is basically like playing with background and foreground. So he has these like shots that are composed with all the characters in the field of view, and he'll change the focus from the person in the foreground to the background and vice versa and stuff, which is something that you kind of like see throughout his career that he does really well. And then in the climax of it, there's like a killer and the person he's trying to kill kind of like silhouetted against in this dark TV set room, like
Oh,
kind
wow.
of like it feels very much like Hitchcock. Like you can see both of them. It's a wide shot, silhouetted, and it's a pretty good climactic shot.
Cool.
But again, wasn't received well critically as a show or a TV movie. But again, they were like, this Spielberg guy, he's got something with his camera work. And he was actually in Europe at the time that it was released for the Duel premiere.
He's out of Dodge,
So
man. I'm going to my
he's gone.
going to my first feature, my real one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just kind of wrapping all of it up. I wrote down this quote that Spielberg had said, and he said it was around this time. I guess like thinking back on this point of his career, and he just said, "I take all my movies seriously," and he goes on and talks like fleshes that out, and he's kind of making the point that if you can't make like popcorn. He calls them popcorn movies. So he does know the sorts of movies he's making. He's not like unaware of that. And he says you can't make good popcorn movies unless you believe the stories you're telling. And I just love that because it's so vital for the rest of his career, the success of his career. He believes the stories he's telling, and it comes across. It's that genuineness that I talked about in the overview episode that like comes bursting through the screen. He believes these stories, and it's genuineness in the visuals and the emotion. And yeah, it's just what makes Spielberg Spielberg. Just I believe these stories, and you gotta love it. But yeah, did you have any final thoughts?
I like the movie. I think it is. I mean, if that is a first film of a 24-year-old, I think it is absolutely super impressive, and it still holds up
Yeah.
today because they didn't use
Mm-hmm.
special effects or studio lots. They actually filmed it out on these highways, or most of it out there. So yeah, I mean, you see that if you're a studio exec or anything back in that time, I think you know that you have serious talent. And it's
Oh yeah.
only, he's only a couple movies away from making Jaws. And this
Mm-hmm.
was maybe kind of a precursor to Jaws in some ways because it's another cat and
Yeah.
mouse type of thriller. So he's cutting his teeth here, and while he's cutting his teeth, he's making a pretty darn good movie. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think you just for any Spielberg fan or really any fan of movies, just watching this, I think you just enjoy this. It's a good thriller. It's right about the right length. It's not too long. It just keeps you going. The suspense
Mm-hmm.
is there, um, and yeah, a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's great tension. It's a lot of fun. It's interesting. I don't think I've seen any other movie like it. As far as like the concept. And so yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's like it does have its like early career director career flaws that we kind of touched on. But yeah, I'm still very much positive on it. I think I gave it like 3.5 stars on Letterboxd,
Same for me.
which yeah, cool. and it's a little too early for me to say like where it falls with Spielberg for me, because I do have a good bit of blind spots. But I would imagine it'll probably still be like towards the lower end, just because he has so many great movies.
Exactly.
But yeah,
Yeah, saying
yeah,
saying it is in the lower end does not by any
of
means
Spielberg. Yeah,
say that this is a bad movie. It's a good movie.
yeah,
But yeah, I think it's
yeah.
I've seen every single one of Spielberg's movies except for some of the TV stuff
Those two
and
TV ones. Yeah,
Something Evil and Savage.
yeah,
But this is it's below average for him, but you know,
yeah,
for me, like the amount of 5-star movies that Spielberg has made takes up a little bit of his filmography, honestly. So
yeah, yeah, for sure.
yeah,
Yeah, well, that's it for Duel and Spielberg's TV career. We're actually, I don't think I told Dave this, but the way I have things worked out scheduling wise, um, we're actually about to do a quick car chase draft of car chases in movies. That's actually going to be already released while you're listening to this. I'm going to release the draft before we do the talk on Duel. So I hope that turns out good. If you're listening, you already know we're kind of pulling a Christopher Nolan and going out of time sequence with the release schedule. But yeah, and the reason for that is because next week it just falls perfectly for me to do kind of a Oscars preview slash an excuse for me to finally like talk about my favorite movies of last year. So that's what I'm going to do next week, kind of like a Oscars preview slash best of 2023 show. And so I'm looking forward to putting that together, and I hope it turns out well. But yeah, so I'll be looking forward to that next week. And then obviously we'll be covering the Sugarland Express after that, his first theatrical released movie. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to be watching that very, very soon. And I'm excited to see that one. So yeah, that's pretty much it for Duel. Dave, did you want to share real quick where people can kind of follow you and your work? Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on what is formerly known as Twitter X. I am at Dave J Lester. I'm also on Blue Sky if any of you are on there. And
Okay.
you can listen to my 2 podcasts. I mentioned one at the top of this show, Does the Bible Say That?, where I go through books of the Bible verse by verse. And then I have another podcast, Veterans of Culture Wars, with my co-host, Zach Malm, if you want to check me out. Spotify, Apple for both of those, or some other places as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll definitely link those in the episode description, so you can find that there. Click the links. But yeah, that's gonna do it for the Duel episode. And I just a quick reminder to go rate and review the show if you haven't done that. It helps with the visibility. And you can find everything you need to know about the show at establishingshotpod.com. But yeah, that's it. I had a great time talking Duel. And yeah, I've been Eli Price, and for Dave Lester, you've been listening to The Establishing Shot. See you next time.
We were happy here. For a little while.
But look, I figure it this way. Better to be king for a night than schmuck for a lifetime.